Welcome to Sister Sharpens Sister. My name is Karen. I'm joined by my beautiful, sharp, and strong sisters, Delina and Shalon. And today we're talking about medieval, medieval is how you say it? Yeah, medieval
Medieval,
times,
yeah.
1500 to 1700, and food and their diet. And we're going to talk a little bit about how it compares to the standard American diet of today, not the diet that they have over in uh, Europe and Great Britain now, because what they have over there now is different than what we have here, much to our dismay. So,
Yeah.
to start off with, we're going to start off with the century of the 1500s. And the 1500s, hang on, I'm losing my notes. That's what happens for not getting them all stapled in. All right. Villages in the early 1500s were that's where 90% of the population of England was. And those villages were at max 400 people. But the larger cities would have around 10,000 people. And I wrote down what those cities were. Let me get to that page. Norwich, Bristol, Newcastle, and London were the only ones in the 1500s that had a population of around 10,000 people. And I live in a very small town in southern West Virginia that has more than 10,000 people. So I cannot imagine the city of London having less than 10,000 people in it.
Right.
That's almost mind blowing.
Hmm.
But at the beginning of the 1500s, the population of Britain was right around 2 to 3 million people. It just depended on what year it was, what plague happened to be happening, and how many people got sick and died.
Yeah.
Now, by 1801, though, population was around 9 million. So towns became overcrowded and unemployment was high, and there was a lot of slums. Um, During the 1500s, food was mainly based on what they called bread and pottage, Pottage, which is kind of like it's just a stew, really. Pottage consisted of various ingredients and was often left over a fire for a number of days. And people would eat out of it. And then whoever was cooking would put more vegetables in it. And if there was meat available, fish, fowl, or, like deer, whatever else they ate back in those days, would go into the thing as well. So think about the nursery rhyme: peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot
Porridge in the
nine
pot,
days
nine
old.
days old.
Yes. Now, I never understood 9 days old until I was doing this research, and it said that this was left over the fire for a number of days.
Hmm.
Now that makes complete sense to me. And it was a staple in the 1500s that started, well, it started like back in the ninth century, but went all the way through until like the 1800s, the turn of, industrial revolution. And it's also what Esau from the Bible received from Jacob
Hmm.
in return for his heritage was
Yeah. Oh, you're
pottage.
right. You're right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know what? You can feed more people with stew than you can with just making a steak and potatoes.
Yeah. Or even a soup.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah.
But for the wealthy, feasting and gluttony was commonplace. The wealthy would also have pottage in the 1500s, but their pottage would contain the higher grade of vegetables. It would have meat almost every time. So,
Hmm.
they were eating better and eating high on the hog. You know what that means, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. If you eat high
Toasted.
on the hog, you're eating the uppercuts, like picture a pig, legs in the ground, right? If you're eating high on the hog, you're eating anything that was above the mud,
Yeah.
right? So bacon wasn't necessarily a food for the rich because that's the belly of the pig.
Boy, they were
Hmm.
missing out.
Yes, they
Yeah,
were,
no
weren't
kidding. Now, during the plague, and we're talking bubonic plague and all the plagues that they had in Europe at the time, food consumption changed because doctors would often claim that fruit and vegetables were the reason people were getting sick. So they were discouraged from eating fruit and vegetables. And if you think about somebody that's poor and there's a plague happening, and you tell them they can't have potatoes because they could get the plague, they're
Hmm.
going to be hungry.
Yeah, they're gonna starve.
They will
Mhm.
starve. But historians know through written record that the vegetables, all of them, used to be cooked before they were served. Even fruit was cooked. You'd never ate a raw fruit or a raw vegetable. And here's the reason why. They didn't discover this until just recently. And when I say recently, like within the past 20 years, is that when the farmers would take their produce to market, in order to get the dirt off of it, they would spit on it and shine it and clean it that way with
No wonder
spit,
they had those plagues.
right? I can't think of somebody having the flu and going to market and and cleaning my apples before I bring them home.
Yeah, right.
Right? Yeah. Now, spices and herbs were basically controlled by the Arab nations at this time. If you think about things like cinnamon and nutmeg, um, saffron, things like that, were only for wealthy, and they only had it in very small, minute amounts. But things like sage, parsley, mint, and dill was readily available throughout the countryside. You could just go get it. And not only was it used in cooking, but they used it for medicine as well.
Hmm.
So
Grew wild, I
coriander,
think, right?
yeah, right.
Mhm.
Coriander they would use for fever. Anise they would use for flatulence. And rosemary could supposedly cure nightmares. Now, coriander sounds kind of exotic until you know exactly what it is. Do you guys know what coriander is? Coriander is the
Cilantro.
dried seeds of cilantro. That's right.
Did
And
he
Dee Dee
frozen
froze
again?
again. Look at that face. I'll have to clip that face out. That's funny. All right, we'll wait for her to come back in. Are you back?
I can hear you. I can't see you yet. I don't know what's going on.
Okay. Maybe it'll come back.
Yeah, there it is. Okay.
All right, good.
Goodness. Okay.
All right, during the 1500s, peasants would often eat up to 3 pounds of grain a day. It's a lot of grain.
Well, yeah, it does. It does sound like a lot, and although it is, but they had a much different lifestyle than we had. They
Mm-hmm.
needed a whole lot more calories.
They did. And their grain consumption came in the forms of bread, porridge or pottage, because a lot of times grain would be added to that, and their beer.
Yeah.
Beer was not, but like back then, beer was not like it is today.
Mm-mm.
It actually had the grain and the hops still in it, and you would eat that. You would chew it as you were drinking your beer. Now, milk from any of the animals, of cow, sheep, goat, was typically reserved for cheeses and for butter. But I did
Hmm.
not know this until I was doing research for this podcast that almond milk became very big and popular in the 13th century,
Yeah, I've read that. Yeah. That's interesting, isn't
right? So, like
it?
10 years ago, everybody was like, oh, almond milk, it's new. No, it's not new. It is not new. And the sheer number of recipes that they have come across from like German recipe books,
Mhm.
uh, what am I thinking of? The Viking area, what a Nordic. the Nordic
yeah.
recipe books all talk about using almond milk. So it was actually pretty much a staple and not just a specialty ingredient.
My guess is it probably didn't spoil as quickly.
Right. And
Yeah,
and
'cause
two, like during Lent, they would a lot of times the churches would say you can't have anything with animal products in it. So that 40 days you're going without milk, without cheese, without butter, without meat.
mhm,
So how do you make your bread if you don't have milk or eggs?
mhm.
Water.
Yeah. But they would use almond milk. And then the almonds that they had ground up to soak in the water to make the almond milk, they would use that almond flour to make cookies and things like that because it had a sweeter flavor than just regular flour. But that's what I have as far as the 1500s and diet. So when you compare that with today, poor people are basically in the same situation to where they cannot afford finer cuts or the less fatty cuts of meats, not even chicken. I mean, chicken has gotten expensive anymore. Eggs are not as cheap as they used to be. Used to be you could go to Aldi's and find a dozen eggs for 79 cents, and now you're lucky if you get it for less than $1.39. So, excuse me.
That's really cheap. I pay a lot more for eggs than that.
Well, these are
I
just
get my eggs. I get my eggs every day.
Hush,
yeah, I know
chicken
where you
lady.
get your eggs.
Rub it in.
Dee Dee, do you glass your eggs? Have you tried that?
We've talked about it, but no, we don't. And the reason being is because even though we sometimes do have way more eggs than we need, we either have like some of Norman's family lives here where they need eggs, so we'll share the eggs with them. And we've got a few neighbors that don't have a lot, so we'll share with them. Or we will either boil them up or scramble them up with just a tiny bit of olive oil and feed them back to the chicken.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's a healthy supplement for the chickens.
Okay. I was just wondering what you did with them because I have seen YouTube videos where people are homesteading and they get too many eggs and they do what they call glassing the eggs. And it's some kind of I forget what they put in the water.
I don't remember off the top of my head either, but I've read about it and we've
Yeah.
talked about it, but we don't really have a need for it, so we don't do it.
Yeah, the Amish do it a lot, I think, too.
Probably, yeah,
Not like Mennonite Amish, but the Amish Amish.
right, yeah. That's where my husband goes to get our feed for our chickens.
Yeah, it's probably the best place to get it.
Mhm.
I did do a little bit of research on like who the leaders were in the 1500s for England. And this was during the Tudor period. So if you watch the show The Tudors,
I've seen that.
then you've got a little bit of an idea of what was going on. But in 1485, King Henry VII started his reign and he went until 1509, followed by the infamous King Henry VIII. And then he had three kids who also reigned over England, and that would have been Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I.
Mhm.
And Tudor blood is still in the royalty of England today because King Charles is related to George I.
Isn't he also related to the guy who Dracula's spawned off of?
See, now I heard that too, but I don't know how true that is.
No, I
Yeah,
saw a video or something of him actually saying it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
they're
I'll
all
have to look
inbred.
that one up.
Yeah, look it up.
Um, okay, and that's what I have for the
Okay,
1500s.
then
Basically, you ate again what we said with in our Aussie episode is you ate what the land provided.
mhm.
Land and the animals you could find.
Exactly,
Yep,
yeah. So now
yep.
that
Okay,
brings
so
us to the 1600s, and I think that's Dee Dee.
that's me. I'm doing the 1600s, and of course, what Karen just talked about would have at the end of the 1500s to the beginning of the 1600s, it would have bled over into the next century.
Mhm.
So, and what I'm talking about is starting with the American colonies, because we're bringing this home to the United States and the standard American diet. So we started in England, which is the motherland of America, and then we brought it here. So we're starting with the colonies. That means I'm starting with the colonies.
Yeah, I think it's a
So,
good place to start.
and I didn't focus on every single colony. I didn't do that because if we were going to do that, we would have at least, at minimum, 13 episodes. So
At
I
the
did not do
minimum.
that. Yes. But what I did do is I got a little bit of information about Jamestown, which is the first English settlement, which was in 1607.
What about
I
the
got a lot
colony
of
of Roanoke? Not that there was much that anybody would know about the colony of Roanoke, but when was
that.
that?
I didn't look that up. I'm not sure. But nothing ever came of it. So I didn't focus on that. But you know what? Let me see if I can find it.
That's what I'm looking up right now. 1585.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I didn't focus on that because it didn't last. So
Mm-hmm.
it's, even though it may be the first colony, it didn't sustain itself. So that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
And for people who may not be familiar, that is off the coast of North Carolina.
Right.
So my focus on basic information came from what is taught in the history books, which is the first successful English settlement, which is Jamestown in Virginia. Was in 1607 is when they put roots down, I guess you could say. The settlement was erected on a narrow peninsula in the James River. They constructed a wood fort, a church, and some houses. And they suffered from hunger and disease and struggled to grow crops due to the drought that was going on in the area and their inexperience with growing food in America. They relied heavily on supplies from other ships from England and from the local indigenous peoples.
So did
And
you look up the difference between the like how different what the growth zones would have been? I mean, we have that information now, like the growth zones, like Florida, where I'm at now is like 7,
9, where you are, it's a 9.
9. Okay. And where I live in West Virginia is either 5B or 6A.
Right.
So I wonder what England would have been.
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't look at that. I did briefly look at that when I looked at what fruits were native to North America. I'm
That
like,
time when they came over.
well, yeah, well, I mean, I was just looking to what was native to North America and what zone they would have grown in, trying to
Yeah.
figure out, okay, did the people in Virginia possibly eat blackberries or
Oh, okay.
mulberries or because these were foods that they would have pulled in. I mean, even if they didn't have the indigenous people to teach them this, they probably would have seen berries on a tree or in a bush and thought, and eat it, because especially if they're starving, they're going to be eating what they can find.
Right. Well, I just
So I
Googled it and
didn't.
it says that England is growth zones, what did that say? 6 through 9.
Okay.
But they don't come all the way down to Florida.
I have no idea. I mean, I have a basic idea of where England is, but as far as how close it is to the equator, I don't know.
Okay.
That's surprising to me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, but are the growth zones the same? Are those just maybe growth zones for England and,
They may be.
and
England may have
England
their
only,
own
you know?
growth zones. Yeah, and America may have theirs. So it may be a difference there. It may be different growth zones for different countries. So,
Yeah. Okay.
okay. So, and something else I came across too when I was doing my research is that James I, who was King of England at the time, started a company called the Virginia Company. And what I read was the Virginia Company told these settlers, we want you to make money so you trade with the locals to get your food.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there is that. So they did trade with the indigenous peoples. They were part of the Algonquin tribe, and Powhatan was their chief, their leader. So when you see anything talking about the Virginia colony, talk about Powhatan, which is, by the way, the empire that Pocahontas belonged to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's who they're talking about. Okay, John Smith was the one that was able to negotiate that trade agreement between the settlers and the Powhatan Empire. And Mr. Smith, it says, was accidentally burned by gunpowder and forced to return to England, never to return to Virginia. Lucky
So
for
all the
him.
stories of John Smith and Pocahontas.
Well, they may have had an affair or whatever. I have no idea, but that's not who he married. Who she married. So now the relation with the Powhatan Empire grew hostile due to several reasons, including but not limited to land, because the English were trying to take land, survival, because everybody needs food, stolen goods, because apparently the Powhatan Empire stole weapons, guns, knives, and swords from the English. The English said, "You better give them back." "We're not giving them back." "You better give them back." "We're not giving them back." So the English attacked. And hospitality. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? But what it was apparently is that they wanted some of the English to marry some of the indigenous women, and they wouldn't do it. So it made them angry.
I
Now,
wonder why they wanted them to marry some of the indigenous women.
I don't know. I didn't look into that, but it could be something along the line of like where royal families will have this one and this one to marry to create a link.
Right.
So possibly something like that. That I'm not sure if that's how the indigenous people's culture was at the time. I don't know.
Yeah. It'd be
Um,
interesting to hear it from their side.
it would. It would. And if that's how they did things, that would explain why they were getting upset, because they wanted to create, I don't know, a brotherhood with the English, so to speak.
It
But
makes me think of the things you hear about Britain and Scotland and them trying to breed them out.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
so eventually, the relationship between the English settlers and the indigenous people in Virginia at the time became adversarial, which probably made it to where they may have been afraid to leave the fort. So even if they were able to hunt and had some knowledge about hunting animals, they wouldn't have been able to do it. They didn't know the land, and they were not as good at doing things on the land as the indigenous people were. They were not. And I even looked up, well, why didn't they eat fish? They were on a river, and they speculate that they may have learned how to fish from the Powhatan Empire, but if they didn't know how to fix the fishing apparatus, they would have broken and they wouldn't have been able to fish. Or perhaps they would have had to have left the fort to fish. So there's that. So
I cannot imagine one country sending people to a new country without sending people who knew how to hunt and fish to begin with. So
yes,
it was probably more along the lines of not being able to procure what they needed to fix things.
right, yes. Of course, they were also relying on supply ships from England, but this was back in the 1600s. That supply ship may or may not have got there, or it may or may not have come when you absolutely needed it either. So they were very dependent on that, and they struggled. They were starving. They were dying of disease. So they made it up to 1609, and from 1609 to 1610, they have named that the Starving Colony. Okay, George Percy, who was the governor of Jamestown during that period, wrote in 1625 that the colonists ate their horses to survive, and later moved on to dogs, cats, and vermin such as rats and mice. They would even eat venomous snakes. And he also wrote that there was cannibals. And there were 5 other accounts of the colonists resorting to cannibalism. Huh?
Oh, we lost you there in that last section. Can you say it again?
Oh yeah, okay. I'm not sure exactly what last section it was, but okay, George Percy, the governor, wrote that they eventually resorted to cannibalism after eating horses, dogs, cats, vermin,
Wow.
venomous snakes. Um, and there were
Oh, I have a
5 other
question.
accounts of this happening. Okay,
I have a question.
okay.
How did they decide who they were going to eat?
Right?
Well, archaeologists found skeletal remains, fragments of a person bearing marks of an axe or cleaver and bearing marks of a knife. And the archaeologists say they believe that that's the telltale signs of cannibalism. Based on what they recovered, and they didn't recover much, it was a leg bone, a skull, and a jawbone. But looking at those bones, nothing happened to this person who was a 14-year-old girl that would have caused her death. But anything could have caused her death. She could have been shot in the chest. She could have been, her throat could have been cut. No, that they don't know. So I don't know. Um, so they resorted to cannibalism. Yeah. So eventually they learned how to grow crops from the indigenous people and also from experimenting with their own. And they also, at one point in time, tried to grow cotton because remember the Virginia company wanted to make money. Cotton was a cash crop. Virginia at the time, I don't know about now, but at the time was not hot enough for them to grow cotton. So they didn't try that anymore, but they did successfully grow tobacco, which made the Virginia company more successful and made more money, which made more English people want to come and settle, which that helped them to survive. Not to mention that Pocahontas and John Rolfe got married, which much improved the relations between the two peoples. So now the Powhatan Empire, they farmed corn, beans, squash, and pumpkins. And I realize pumpkin is a kind of squash, but they separated them out here. They grew those and they traded them with the colonists. And eventually they would have taught the colonists how to grow. Now, some settlers would have brought white potatoes with them, but they did not become widely grown until much later in the American colonies because it's the Irish immigrants that made that popular. In 1648, the sweet potato was first first grown in America. And in the mid 1600s, the English brought apple trees to the American colonies.
Well, it's hard to think of America without apple trees, especially where I'm from. Like the Johnny Appleseed story was supposedly to have happened in the Appalachian Mountains.
Yeah, in Tennessee,
Around
actually. Yeah.
planting apple trees.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, he weren't around planting them. They weren't native, I guess.
I mean, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was
It's
the
such a
Spanish that
staple
brought.
nowadays.
I know the peaches too. The Georgia peach, right?
Right.
Peaches are not native to North America. The Spanish brought them. But you know what is native? Cherries.
Cherries?
Cherries. Cherries. All kinds of different kinds of cherries. I didn't look up all the different kinds, but sweet and tart cherries.
Wow.
Mulberries, blackberries, raspberries, any kind of berry you can think of, blueberries, they're native. And they can grow anywhere between zones 3 and 9.
Yeah.
Depending on exactly what kind it is. As far as meats, they hunted wild game, of course, which included venison, turkey, rabbit, duck, swan, whatever kind of wild game there was, they would hunt it. They fished. They ate cod. They ate flounder. They ate lobsters, because we get the New England colonies.
Mm-hmm.
They ate.
You got bass and trout and carp and catfish.
Yes. Yes. If they were close to a river that had food in it, they would fish it and eat it. If they were close to the ocean, they would fish it and eat it. They also ate passenger pigeons. Now, my husband has had pigeon before, and he says it is really good.
Interesting.
Yeah, they have pigeon hunting where I live. Go pigeon hunting.
I've never had pigeon.
I haven't either. I, I would probably try it if he had some, but I can't say I want to go out and kill a pigeon and eat it.
Right.
Yeah.
Not something I think I want to do. But the thing is that the colonists ate passenger pigeons, and they were hunted to extinction. The last one was seen in 1914. So the pigeons
So it's
people eat
not,
now are not the same.
yeah,
The
it's
same
not
kind of
the
pigeon.
same.
Yeah. Pigeon pie was popular in England, so it makes sense that it also became popular in the colonies. They ate what's called flint corn, also known as Indian corn, which is actually what the indigenous peoples they would grow. They grew that, and they taught the English settlers how to do that, and they taught them how to dry it and make cornmeal, which became a staple in all 13 colonies. Cornmeal did.
Mm-hmm.
Beans, and when I say beans, and I looked up, I'm like, what kind of bean? Does that mean a green bean, which is also called a pole bean and a climber bean? But it was any kind of bean you can think of. Apparently, they were growing it. These were the natives that were farming. Okay, including a cranberry bean, and I'm like, what's a cranberry bean? I look it up, and apparently, it's a type of kidney bean that looks similar to a pinto bean, but it's not a pinto bean. So I mentioned squash and pumpkins. Meat. Eventually, the English brought pigs, cows, chickens, sheep, goats. Eventually, they brought all of those with them. So, of course, they would put those in their diet eventually. Um, Fruit, of course, was in season at different times in different colonies. Native fruits like strawberries, but the strawberries were not like the big strawberries you see now. They're like really tiny, more like the size of a blueberry. Some of those actually grow in my yard. We feed them to the chickens.
Yeah, we've got them in our yard too.
Yeah. Huckleberries, blackberries, they were plentiful, and they were available in the spring and the summer. So, and they would dry them to preserve them for the winter. So they ate those. Eventually, they did have dairy, but because milk spoils so fast, like Karen said about in 1500s, it was used primarily to make cheese and butter.
Mm-hmm.
Crab apples was also a fruit that they had.
Crab
Let's see, I
apples are
talked
good for
about
throwing
fruit.
at each other.
Yes, they are. Herbs and spices. Of course, they had herbs and spices. Those native to America would be mint, sumac, sage, juniper, the chiltepin. Hold on, chil chiltepin, chili. Sorry, chiltepin chili.
Okay.
Okay, it is the only chili native to North America, and it's believed to be the oldest of the chilies. And it's teeny tiny. The Scoville heat unit for the chiltepin chili pepper, 50,000 to 100,000.
Wow.
Yeah. The very popular jalapeno is between 2,000 and 8,000, just to give
Yeah.
people a general. Yeah. The peppercini peppers that they put in that Papa John puts in their pizzas, they're between 100 and 500. So this was a hot pepper, or it is a hot pepper. You can still get them.
Yeah, we found it at Lowe's one year. It was in a pot and it said a chili on it. And my husband wanted to get it and try them. And it bushed and it's very pretty. And the largest one was even smaller than my pinky. Now I have small hands for anybody that is interested, but the largest pepper was smaller than my pinky.
Yeah,
And
they're small for sure.
he cut one open and smelled it and he's like, "No way was he eating that."
Well, what is it they say about scorpions? It's the tiny ones you need to worry about.
Yeah, the
Right,
smaller the
yeah.
worse.
So there you go, I guess. Um, and I did pull out a little bit of information about what they had at the very first Thanksgiving meal.
Okay.
Okay.
There's a whole lot of
Um,
speculation about that. So you're going to
there
be
is.
sure to send me your resources.
Okay. Um, According to what I came across, there are only two surviving sources that speak of the menu of the first Thanksgiving. Edward Winslow's writing in Mort's Relation, and William Bradford writing in A Klamath Plantation. So apparently those two gentlemen wrote a little bit about the kind of food that was at the first Thanksgiving. It was in what would be known, it was known today as Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1621. It was attended by roughly 90 indigenous people and 52 English. It was a feast of freshly killed deer, sorted windfowl, most likely duck or geese, but potentially carrier pigeons or swans, most likely they say not turkey. A bounty of cod and bass and flint, which is the corn.
Right.
A native variety of corn, bread and porridge. Other foods served were probably native crops, but these were not in what these gentlemen wrote about. But the indigenous natives would have brought food to the table, and so it's likely that there probably would have been, of course, corn, maybe peas, beans, and squash, maybe even pumpkin.
Pumpkin, yeah.
Yeah. Would they have made it into a pie? Possibly. They did not have table sugar like we have it, although they did have sugar. It was very expensive. They probably did not have it to make a real nice pumpkin pie, although I don't like pumpkin. I like pumpkin pie. But if they sweetened it with anything, it would have either been honey or maple syrup. Now, at this point in time, there were no white potatoes that they were eating. They didn't have those yet. And I did find some place that said, it said they had bread and porridge, but then I found one that said they may not have actually had bread or gravy because the English settlers would not yet have had a grist mill to grind up to make flour. So that's an
Well, you
up
got
in
to
the
think
air.
about the indigenous people when they were grinding up the corn to make cornmeal. They would have used a handheld
Right.
grist of some kind.
Right. And that may be why one of the sources I found said they did have bread, and perhaps it was something that the indigenous people brought to the table.
Right, yeah.
So,
Maybe it was a flatbread of some kind and not rolls.
okay, so that's basically it. I mean, they ate what the land provided, but of course, the English settlers did eventually start bringing cattle and stuff with them because people of Jamestown didn't bring like cows and pigs and goats and sheep. They brought horses and dogs, apparently. But they didn't bring anything else. But the Virginia Company, from what I read, said, no, 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 no. You're going to go there to make money. Trade with the locals to get your food and stuff, but make money.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So now we have the 1700s, and that's Shalom.
Okay. Just a general overview is they ate a lot of the same stuff y'all are talking about: pork, beef, lamb, fish, shellfish, chicken, corn, beans, vegetables, fruit, and some baked goods. The poor households would have had more pork, beef, and corn, according to what I read, because it was probably less expensive. Something that I did find, which was interesting in the 1700s, was a British naval surgeon by the name of James Lind, who discovered the cure for scurvy, but didn't realize it. And that was done in 1747. And he was the first to perform a controlled clinical trial.
By putting
Okay.
oranges on ships.
Well, he
Lemons.
took 12 soldiers and divided them into 6 pairs and did different things. And the pair that had the citrus cleared up. But he actually didn't believe his results. He kept thinking that it was still caused by some sort of virus. And it wasn't until Gilbert Blaine, who was also a naval surgeon, who was reading Lynn's publishing on his trial, that he figured it out that that's what they needed to beat scurvy. And this is one reason the British Navy became so dominant, is because all their men were healthy.
Isn't it
But
crazy
yeah, and
that
that
they didn't know
interesting.
what vitamin C was?
Yeah. Gilbert Blaine was, and he provisioned lime juice, not lemons, lime
Okay.
juice. And they gave him the nickname Limey.
So that's where
I
that
thought,
comes from.
yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the spices that they would have used, the list that I found was allspice, pepper, nutmeg, cloves, salt, cinnamon, ginger, and the overall flavor of the 1700s was salty and sour,
Hmm.
because they
Gotta
still,
get that vitamin C.
right? And imagine a lot of pickling too,
Right.
especially during the winter, because they had no way of preserving their foods other than drying them or pickling them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A
Mm-hmm.
typical, I found this is actually a PDF, Karen, and I don't know if
Hmm.
I can send that. Can you post a PDF?
I can post a link to where you found the PDF.
Okay. This is from Huntington Historic Society, and they went through a typical meal day of a colonist.
Oh, okay.
It would consist of 2 to 3 meals. Breakfast was most likely a porridge or a mush,
Hmm.
which is cornmeal, oats, or beans. They also mentioned Johnny cakes,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
and which was actually something that the Native Americans were doing, that
Mm-hmm.
the colonists started doing. And a Johnny cake is basically a cornmeal pancake.
Right. Fried cornbread.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Also, they might have had with breakfast some type of bread with jam or butter. I also noticed that in the 1700s, there wasn't a whole lot of just drinking milk. It was used for the cheese and the butter, and any, baking that they might have done. Um, the list I came across for drinks was water, cider, and beer.
Beer. Yep.
And they
Mhm.
even, I'll send it to you, Karen, but even children had watered down beer
Mm-hmm.
for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah.
And so lunch would have been some type of bread, a meat, or a cheese. And most of the cheeses were made by the colonists themselves.
Mhm.
Not everybody had the accessibility to go to a shop that had cheese made. So they would
Right.
just make
Yeah.
it on their own. And dinner would have been some sort of meat stew or meat pie or porridge. Um, a lot of the colonists did not have sugar, like we've mentioned, but they would have been able to sweeten any any baked goods or their porridges with maple syrup, honey, fruit, molasses
Hmm.
was something that I came across as well. Uh, let's see, they would have dried all of their foods to get through the winter. They started doing that in the fall. They dried fruits, they dried meat, they uh, they pickled the vegetables, and a lot of the fruit that they had was made into some type of jam.
Hmm.
And I also have links to recipes, and one of them that I thought was interesting. Let me find my page here. Where is it? But, obviously 1776, very important year.
Very.
I came across Mount Vernon, mountvernon.org, and it's recipes that George and Martha Washington would have entertained people with.
Ah, cool.
Based on what I'm reading. And of course, they've made them more
Modern.
more modern.
Yeah.
But like appetizers and hors d'oeuvres that they have listed are apple hors d'oeuvres, which was apples and onions chopped up and cooked and served on a cracker or piece of bread.
Apples and onions.
Yeah.
Yep. Apples and onions on toast.
Yep.
I gotta think about that one.
Isn't that interesting? Let's see. Dessert, sauces. I was trying to, where's the main meals? Meats and stews. A beef brisket, baked pork chops, common patties. I don't know what this is.
Hamburgers, maybe?
Yep. Ground beef or veal. See, seasoned with bacon, salt, pepper, nutmeg, parsley, thyme, and pastry dough. So this would have probably been like a meat pie, or it would have been like one of those hand pies where the whole meat is wrapped in the pie.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That actually sounds really good.
Doesn't it?
Some of them do, because I've got recipes for pigeon pie, apples and onions on toast, African okra soup, soups, SOOPS, or buttered meats on spinach, Powhatan bread, colony corn chowder, potato stew, Plymouth succotash, which was popular. That was learned from the indigenous peoples, and originally it would have been dried corn and dried beans, but over the years, the colonists and people even today will add a bunch of other stuff to it. Because if you go online to find a succotash recipe, a lot of them will have like bell peppers and tomatoes in it, but the original one did not.
To me, a succotash is basically what you have left over in the refrigerator and you stick it all in one pot.
Yeah, pretty much.
Every
And
time I
also
hear
found-
succotash, I think of Sylvester.
Sylvester the cat.
I
So
also
really,
found,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I
No,
got
no,
one
no.
more thing I want to
Yeah,
say
go.
from the National Park Service, so nps.gov. I found they have a little page that takes you to recipes from the Ashfield Family Cookbook, which was done by the Ashfield family, which was a prominent family in New Jersey. And in this link that I'm going to send you, Karen, it has the old cookbook writing and then an updated version of it. And I thought it was funny to read it. And one of the things that they have in the list is beef a la mode. And just, yeah, no, the wording is interesting. And a big thing about the older cookbooks that I've tried to look up and notice is there are no measurements.
Right.
So it take 12 pounds of a buttock of beef and take 1 pound of larding bacon.
Wow.
Cut in some good large lards. Take some pepper and salt and season your lards. This is from that original cookbook. Then lard your beef pretty thick and put it in a stew with as much water as will just cover it. Season it with pepper and salt, a bunch of sweet herbs, 3 cloves and 2 bay leaves. Then cover it very close and let it stew for at least 4 hours. then lay it on your dish and take off all the fat from the liquor it stewed in, and then throw your liquor over your beef and serve it.
I just see somebody picking up the ladle and going. That's
So
funny.
I thought that was interesting.
I think it's funny too if you look at the way that things were written 15, 16, 1700, the letters aren't even made the same.
No. And
Sometimes they're
especially
not,
like
yeah.
the spelling of some words.
Spelling of some words,
Well,
yeah.
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 They didn't have dictionaries, so different people would spell words differently.
Right.
And some sounds that were in the English language back then are not in the English language now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So those funky looking letters have gone the way of the dinosaur in the current English language.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Wild.
the biggest difference between what we've talked about today and our diet now is nothing was processed.
Right.
That's
It was
That
all
was going to
fresh.
be my point. Nothing was processed, and any processing that was done in the home.
Minimal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like
And
you make
also,
cheese or you make bread or you sit there and grind your wheat to make your
Right.
bread.
Or you
Yeah,
pickle your
and
vegetables or you dry your meat. That's the processing
Mhm.
that was done.
yes.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
It's interesting. It amazes me how far away we are from that. The most of our population
Right.
is.
There are some
Mhm.
inner city kids in places like Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago. They don't even know what a cow looks like.
Yeah, they have no idea where their food comes from or
Right.
how it's
Where does bacon come
done.
from? Can you tell me which
Mhm.
animal that bacon comes from? They have no clue.
Mhm.
They
telling my
have no,
children telling my children that bacon comes from a pig, and I have a daughter who loves pigs, or at least thinks they're cute.
well, I just saw this clip, and I think it was my husband sent it to me, and he probably sent it to you. Was this aunt gave her niece a piece of bacon and told her that it came from Peppa Pig. And the little girl was going, "This bacon is Peppa Pig?"
Oh my goodness.
Mm.
If I can, I will try to add that in, or I'll put a link to that because it was really
You
funny.
should. Yeah, that's really funny. And she always asks me, "Do you like pigs?" And my response is, "Yes, they taste good."
Real good with
Yeah.
eggs or in beans.
Yeah.
You can also use ground pork sausage to make your meat sauce for spaghetti.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And it's
Yeah.
really good
Very
in
good.
chili too, to take like half beef and half pork
Mm-hmm.
when
Yeah.
you're
I mean,
making your
well,
chili.
a traditional lasagna is made with beef and sausage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a traditional shepherd's pie is usually made with veal.
Right. It's shepherd's pie if it's made with veal. It's cottage pie if it's made with beef.
Beef, yeah. So what I usually make is cottage pie.
Cottage pie. Same.
Yeah,
If there's an animal that I will eat, I will not have it for a pet.
right. Unless his name is George and you feed him hot pepper seeds.
Well, that's true, but I was a child at that time.
What?
For anybody that doesn't know, Dee Dee had a pet rooster named George when she was little. She was like 4 or 5.
So
His name was George. He was white. He had a beautiful red comb, red wattle, and he would even come
Mhm.
into the house to get food off the table, and then he would go back outside.
Mhm.
And his name was George.
His name
And
was
he would
George.
come
Yeah.
only to Dee Dee when
Yeah.
Dee Dee
Aw.
called for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
Aw.
But these days, if I would eat the animal, I'm not having it for a pet.
Right. Next week, we're going to get into the Industrial Revolution. We'll talk about the 1800s and the 1900s. And that's going to take up the entire episode, just those 2 centuries.
Mhm.
So we have less than a minute. So I'm going to say bye.
Bye.
I love you guys.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Where's the off button? Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Sister Sharpens Sister. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe because that helps us tremendously. Come back next week as we continue the history of food in America, starting in the 1800s. We'll go through the 1900s, and then 2000, well, that's going to be its own thing. You can follow us over on Instagram at Sister Sharpens Sister. And if you want to get in touch, send an email to sharpsistertrio@gmail.com. Talk to you later. Bye.